Just a quick review video for Period 5 of the APUSH curriculum. Let's get started. Period 5 presents us a young American republic that was experiencing a nationalistic movement for expansion. Not purely geographical, the energy of manifest destiny populated the frontier with the recently liberated Americans, carried forth the Western innovation and technology, as well as the pervasive belief in racial and ethnic doctrines. In a sense, the first stages of American imperialism, the period associated with manifest destiny, may have influenced the true character of Americans and defined the American experience more so than any other period. Seeking opportunities such as precious metals and desiring a truly continental republic, American life and institutions spilled into the former frontier region. As these territories matured and demonstrated a true Republican zeal required by the nation that fought to withdraw with Great Britain, they would be admitted as states. Naturally, the perennial problem that had been postponed by earlier generations multiple times, or at least the extension of that problem into the territories, would come to dominate political debate in America. America drew upon its traditional political strategy of compromise in order to settle the debate. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act all in a sense did the same thing. They appeased both sides, at least for a short period of time. Effectively delaying definitive action, these compromises attempted to maintain the balance of power in Congress. Succeeding compromises contradicted previous compromises. Even still, by the 1850s, the sections were becoming polarized to the extent that violence erupted on the Senate floor. Divergent responses emerged amongst the people over the issue of slavery. It would be false to say that a majority of Northerners were abolitionists. While many did oppose slavery, few were genuine abolitionists. Some did argue on moral and ethical grounds that slavery should be abolished. Others, mainly in the North, argued that slavery and free labor systems just could not coexist. The Free Soil movement vocalized this concern as it began to fear that slave labor would devalue and undermine a free labor market. Attempting to ban slavery in the Mexican Cession, the Wilmot Proviso passed the House, but not the Senate. Defenders of slavery continued to view it as a positive good and argued that the slaveholder cared much more for his slaves than the urban capitalist. They also used racial doctrines, making false arguments that blacks were in fact savages. While unregulated capitalism often led to the exploitation of labor, it of course was not comparable to the crime of slavery. Other supporters of slavery relied on the arguments of states' rights, which were protected by the Constitution. Throughout antebellum America, political parties became increasingly sectional. Slavery and nativist beliefs came to draw voters away from the previously existing parties, and new political identities emerged. The Free Soil movement, for example, was raised on the notion of preventing slavery into the Mexican Cession. Many former Whigs would join the Free Soilers and form the Republican Party. Lincoln's platform, in fact, was a Free Soil platform. In addition to that, Lincoln did not make the Civil War officially about slavery until his 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. One could make the case that this move was more political and strategic than authentically liberating. It's also worth noting that social conflict was spurred on by the influx of immigrant groups to America, Irish to cities and Germans to farms on the frontiers, as well as Asians on the West Coast. This new wave of immigrants evoked a strong response in the states. The Know Nothing Party, for example, politicized anti-immigrant sentiment. The country experienced crisis as an entire section left the Union. Feeling unrepresented in the election of 1860, South Carolina led a train of secession, and 11 states joined together to form the Confederate States of America. The war between the states would last 4 years, and ultimately it was the Northern economy, improved strategy, greater access to resources, and the leadership of Abraham Lincoln which led the North to victory. It is of great significance that the period of Reconstruction that followed the Civil War would see the attempted reshaping of the South. This was followed by resistance and primarily demonstrated through racism and the continued belief of racial superiority. As with any conflict, the damaged relationship needs to be restored. There were several phases of Reconstruction, and you should know that it sort of ends abruptly. Ultimately, the U.S. government extended legal protection to the freedmen, yet left it to the states to set about enforcing that. Lingering economic, political, and social trends persisted well into the 1950s, and arguably beyond that as well. African Americans were first freed by the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment defined citizenship and guaranteed equal protection of the laws to all. Finally, the 15th Amendment granted universal male suffrage. The last amendment actually split the women's rights movement, as some came to see an extension of suffrage to black males as another obstacle to women's suffrage. Economic opportunities were limited due to the reliance on the sharecropping system. Free blacks now rented land from their former masters, paying rent on a portion of their crop. Political and social opportunities were obstructed by local and state policies aimed at keeping African Americans in an inferior position. Violence and intimidation, as well as Supreme Court cases and local political tactics, largely defined the role of African Americans in the South as slaves, all but in name. In addition to this, the segregation mindset would persist into public schools until the landmark court case of Brown v. Board of Ed in 1954. Regardless, waning support in the North, spurred on by the Panic of 1873, led to an abrupt end of federal support for Reconstruction. In 1877, the Republican Party achieved political security by agreeing to remove federal troops from the South. At this time, Republican Rutherford B. Hayes became president, and the Southern states experienced redemption in the South. As the country slid into the Gilded Age, national cohesion resembled the economic and political scene. Reconstruction might be considered the final phase of the American Revolution. Without question, the federal government asserted authority over the states. Congressional or radical Republicans attempted to alter the balance of power between Congress and the president. The economic structure in the South was altered, but the system itself remained largely intact. State and local governments made significant efforts to strip freedmen of rights guaranteed to them by the Reconstruction era. Even before the war's end, Lincoln tried to reunify the country with several speeches. In his Gettysburg Address, Lincoln referenced a new birth of freedom, as well as the Declaration of Independence. In the end, the Union of States would not be truly united until the turn of the 20th century and the Spanish-American War. As for the American people, the divide would not be checked so easily. That's it for Period 5. Thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to getting started on Period 6 in class. Take care.